we're going to be developing a symmetrical character's face. On my left I have some reference images. Sometimes I'll try to have more than one reference, because I feel if I have one reference I might try to focus, or might accidentally focus on that image too much, and that'll lead to having the end result look kind of just like one reference. Now we'll turn on Symmetry tool up here, click this butterfly when you have your brush selected, and then vertical, or enter to get rid of the transform binding thing, and then you can hide your symmetry here. And we're just going to draw a couple lines here where the neck will probably be, and the head. We can always scale and kind of move some stuff around. So I'm just dropping in just overall where the head's going to be. And a little shape here for where the ears will probably be. Alright, and now we're just going to fill this with a gray color underneath. Preferably you want to do this with a solid opaque brush so that there's no transparency here. Just in case, you can duplicate this layer a couple times and move it, or highlight all these, merge them, move them underneath, and now we'll flatten these two layers. There. I'm not really too worried about cleaning up the edges here. We can do that later. I'm more worried about starting to work on the features now. So I'll sometimes doodle a kind of a landmark for where the eyes will go, where the brows will be, or just the brow ridge, and where the nose will go, the bottom of the nose, and the lips, and the shadow underneath the lower lip. I'll lower the opacity on that beginning lay-in or construction. It's not really construction, it's just kind of landmarks. And then now I'll start to kind of develop the eyes. So we'll have kind of the top eyelid shape, and then the bottom eyelid shape. Kind of going for like a diamond lemon shape. Maybe some lines for where the nose mid part was going to be. And then work our way down to the nostril. In the reference images, we can see the crease underneath the lower eyelid, so we can kind of throw that part in. And for the top eyelid, it's not too visible on the left reference, and on the right reference it might be slightly visible in a part of the corner. It's a little dark there with the eyelashes, but it might be partially visible. Next, for the mouth, we'll do the corners here, and then sometimes in the center of the mouth. Alright, next I'll start with dropping in some shadows around the eyes, like the eyelashes. This time I could also drop in just a very light marker for where the eyes might go. Sometimes I'll end up changing this, or move this on a new layer, or just do it really, really faint so that in case I need to erase it, it's not very difficult. See, underneath the nose there's a little bit of a diamond or pentagon shape. And we could shade the under part of the top lip here. Normally I'd like to keep my values pretty light. Alright, so I got most of my dark values. I'm going to leave the eyebrows off until later. Next I'll be doing the side and front planes for the side planes of the head and the face. So all my darker elements are mostly there, and now I'm just drawing in the side parts. Any planes that face down or away. You'll see these on the nose as well. These are tilted towards the side. And also underneath the eyelid here, especially on the top, basically underneath the brow, underneath the nose as well. Alright, and on both of these I kind of see the the cheekbones kind of create a shadowy shape on the side here, so I'm going to just drop that in. So we took care of most of the darker and darkest elements, so that now most of it is going to be revolving around transitioning some of those elements. Occasionally we might add some more dark stuff, but this is most of the elements there now. Now we can even kind of mold the features into looking like different shapes or anything like that. So, alright, so I'm going to switch to basic O squish and basic O flow here, and I also tend to like working with slightly flatter, more elliptical brushes when painting faces. So I'll be kind of brushing this side edge in now, just enough so I can still see the difference between the front part and the side. Sometimes you'll see the shadow come in a little bit more here, and you can kind of make sense of it, like the brow part is kind of coming towards us here, and there's light hitting it from the front, so that's why this is lighter, and this is just slightly darker and kind of connects to the side a little bit. Sometimes there's some sort of skin tissue here around the eyes that will also kind of create a little bit of a shadow on that corner. In the reference here, you can see it kind of on the upper left here. So we can brush some of that. And I'll be merging this down here, because I will be using my blend nice 20% now. So essentially it's kind of just a way to kind of blur in the construction into what I've created already. You can also do this with brushes. This inner part of the eye is generally darker, so we'll add some shading there as well. Sometimes you can build up the dark shape just by taking a brush and just passing over that section. And for the nose area, we're going to kind of push this part out towards the side. It's connecting to this side part. Now we're trying to merge that. Both of these references are on this area here in the middle between the eyes. You can kind of see this middle part between the brows is a little darker. That's the part that's going away from us, so we can kind of add that in here. Very similar to this part here, having dark above it, but there's also a section here that gets darker here in between. Now for the nose, kind of need to make a little bit more space for the middle part of the nose here, so we're just going to clear this area up. And that's for this part right here. So you can kind of think of this as a little ball, but it has some form to it, especially on the bottom. There's usually some planes or some harder angles on the bottom. But if you're kind of new to noses, just you can start kind of with like a rounded piece here, and then nostrils on the left and the right. And then usually you'll see some sort of a kind of dark shape for the actual nostril underneath. So lightening up this area a little bit, just so when we place the nostril shape we can clearly see it. So here in the references, one is kind of like this shape, and the other one is kind of more like this shape. So what we can do here is kind of create a little bit of a in-between of those two. So we end up with something kind of like this. Alright, for both of these we have kind of this darker part that comes down this way. And then also this part right here typically gets a little bit of shading right here, this little pentagon shape. Usually this part sinks in, so it's a little darker and shaded in here. Also, this should probably move down or move the nose up so that this has a little bit more space. So we're going to move the nose up slightly. We're going to just select this and Control-Shift-C to copy and Control-V to paste. And now we can move it up with the arrow keys. You can also move with the mouse if you hold down Shift to keep it straight, but we'll just move with arrow keys. And then we'll paint out some of this. So yeah, moving features around and scaling them up or down are pretty easy to do in Photoshop. So now I'm just kind of adding a little bit more shape to the lip. And I'm going to add more shading towards the outside as it gets closer to the outside corner. We can shade the shadow being created onto the lower lip from the top lip here. And you can also kind of render the mouth usually, like you're imagining two beans here. So there'll be shadows of smaller forms here, and sometimes right in the middle, a little shadow like this. And the sides of the lips, sometimes towards the outside here. Underneath the bottom lip is usually a very dark area because you have surfaces facing away from the light source, which is above us, and also you have light from the bottom lip blocking light from hitting this area here. And in both of these, you kind of see the shadow kind of moving out towards this direction from there. So we're going to just pull it slightly and blur it on the way out. If you darken the upper sides of the nose, it's going to make it feel like it comes out more towards us, because wherever you put more darker values, that means that there's more form there. So yeah, just be aware of that. More shading usually implies more form change. And then we'll kind of work our way back up to the eyes. We're going to add a little bit of darkening in here. Sometimes the skin around here could be a little darker. And sometimes the crease itself will also kind of have more of an S shape as well over here, like this. You can definitely see it on our left reference. So we'll brush it in, and I try to use a smudge tool in very little amounts, because it can overblend areas really easily. Also, the smudge tool doesn't work with symmetry in Photoshop, so you're going to have to run some sort of action to mirror if you have one, or just copy the right side and flip it and place it over the left side. I have a manual or automatic way to do that here with the actions, so I'm going to run it, and so everything I did on the right side gets mirrored onto the left side. Alright, now we're going to kind of bring in some more of the jaw a little bit further in, and then the cheek as well. Sorry, the chin. Next here we can kind of bring up some of the shading here along the side up. This just kind of brushing over this area. For both of these, it looks like there's a little kind of a dark area here on the side. It's kind of very subtle. I'm just going to darken this area here. And yeah, we can start to kind of work a little bit on the top eyelash here. Alright, we're going to drop in a placeholder eyebrows on a separate layer so we can kind of work on the skin underneath. For this, I'll just drop in a shape with a dark gray. Alright, next we're going to add a little bit of more shading onto the upper part of the eye. And this part for the eye, think of it as like a form that is kind of wrapping and curving over the section, like a tube. So the parts that wrap and pull away from us are going to get darker. So we're going to add a little bit of shading to the left side and a little bit of shading to the right side, leaving this area in the middle kind of bright, and that's going to make the eye kind of start to feel like it's really rounding out. Next we could try to drop in a little bit of shadow inside the eye from the eyelashes and the upper eyelid. Sometimes the eyelash at the right side of the eyes, they're typically longer, and they might even kind of carry over onto the lower eyelid area. I'm going to adjust the shape of the nose here, add a little bit more shadows to some of this lower area here, and then even also kind of drop in the shadow underneath the nose a little more. Next we can kind of round out the top of the head and add a little bit more darker values to the outside and on the top part. Alright, let's put that in a folder here, and we can kind of see the shading that we've applied so far. We can apply a little bit more shading to the chin area, as that area is kind of typically a little bit farther away from the light source. So we're going to shade that part down a little bit. Sometimes for the jaw, you can sometimes leave a slightly lighter area on the outside here, and that'll kind of make this look a little bit more pronounced here on the side, and that's leaving this area a little bit lighter. And also make a slight adjustment here to this, and we can kind of take this part here and duplicate it and move it down a little bit. This one here, we're going to merge it down, just so we can start erasing some of this. Don't really care too much about this, but as you can see, this part of the head kind of has a slight curve outwards, so we can kind of adjust it here and then erase the excess. I try to find or exaggerate the harder corners usually because it's a little easier to remember the head shapes. Like if there's, is there a corner here, is there a corner here, and if so, just exaggerate it a little bit so it becomes a little bit easier to see. And then for the ears, we're not gonna spend too much time on them. Typically, you can make this kind of shape, circle shape, and then a line, and then a little, almost like a scythe shape. And usually there's another sort of little round shape down here. You can kind of see it in this reference here. Once you have these shapes in there, you can do a little bit of shading that you might see because there's some stuff happening here in the ears. Like this scythe shape usually is a little darker. There's also the shadow underneath the jaw. And so this is kind of safe to do as a shape, just this because it kind of mimics the shape of the jaw coming out, and then we can kind of shade it in. It's not always this clear, but this is not the worst shape to create this shadow shape underneath. And once you add it in, it really starts to make it feel like your jaw here is definitely coming out and away from the neck area. Of course, there are other forms here happening, but this is probably good enough here. We could do some minor shading of the neck, but I kind of want to just focus on more of the face here. So we do see some highlights. We're not going to get into them too much, but we can add in some slight lightness to this under eyelid because it has like a top plane that gets hit by light. So that's kind of what we're able to see here in the reference. Next, we can also add in the tear duct here and also start shading in some of the eye in here. So the eye is kind of in this space, and in this space I like to compare it to like if you had an orange and you kind of had to like slice into it, right? So it makes sense for there to be shadows being applied because there's just this further in part of the eye in the with this kind of layer of skin around it, right? So there's going to be that. There's also going to be the eyelashes kind of blocking some light from hitting the eye here. So there's a shadow on that. But then the eye itself should also be rendered, as like a sphere. All right, and now we can kind of fill in the eye shape here. We can go a little bit brighter here for the eye, especially kind of here in the middle. And my biggest suggestion for painting eyes is probably just painting it just completely as a sphere first, just like this, so that you can kind of get the overall feel of it. And then once you've gotten it this far, then you can start working the pupil and the interior in, just so that you can kind of see the shading and the form is right first before going even further. Here, I'm just going to add a little bit more shading on the right side here of the eye. And if I feel like it's too dark, I'll just lower the opacity. And now we'll merge everything down so I can mirror. Okay, now we'll drop in the eye. Because the eye is dark here, it's going to be a little easier. We can just do it on a new layer. Ideally, you can do it with the elliptical lasso tool to drop in a perfectly round sphere. And we're going to mirror it. It's probably going to feel like it's too large, so we're going to just shrink it down some more. And next we're going to blur it because the eye is usually not super crisp and clear. So we're going to just run a filter, blur, Gaussian blur. There, that's a little bit better. And then we'll add a highlight. The highlight could be just a small kind of line, or sometimes it's a little bit broken up. So we're not going to spend too much time on it, but essentially you're able to see the light source or light elements kind of being reflected back in the eye. And typically you're going to want to take off symmetry with this because of the way that the light hits things. They're not going to be in the exact same place. They're going to be kind of like this. So if we don't factor in that little gray element here, you know, the light is kind of hitting this, I would say the light is kind of coming in from this side over here, a little bit more to the left. You want to be careful of this because right now your light source is right in the middle, so it makes sense that our two highlights are going to be somewhat kind of close to the same location based off of the light source. But if your light source moves, then so should the highlights. For example, if our light source was directly over here, then the highlight's going to be roughly in the same place for both eyes. That is to say, one is not going to be over here, right? It's going to be on this right side because the light source is on the right side. Yep. So yeah, we're going to just make a new set here. Since our light source is kind of close to the middle, it's going to be okay if these have it roughly kind of here. But we're going to add a second kind of possibly something being caught in the eye, reflected. Might not be the light, just might be some kind of bright element. So a couple things we can still keep doing is we can darken up the this part right here a little bit more on the face. In one of our references, you can kind of see the nose is kind of a little bit more lighter here on this section, and then there's a little bit of darkness here. You can kind of see the form of the nose a little bit better. Also, if you kind of leave things kind of subtle, a little ambiguous here, that's fine. Because sometimes if you over-render or put too many forms in an area, it's kind of like you're putting more visual information to kind of see in the area where it may not need it. So sometimes you can kind of pull attention off of certain features just by having less form and value information on those features. The lips sometimes will be a darker skin tone than the rest of it, so sometimes you can darken up the lips slightly, or just kind of just go over them to darken them slightly. That will make sense. The corners of the lips, those should be really dark here. The other thing we can do is mention some possible slight highlights. So once you get comfortable with values, you can start to work in your highlights more. And if we look at our references, we see the nose has some light elements to it, especially on the right one. We see a little bit of light getting picked up right here along the bridge. So just practicing where you see it, and then also on the end, on the left reference, so having it here. Essentially, because we added a round form here, so if there's a form here, there's going to be some light hitting it on the top part. One way to remember this is you can sometimes find it on the bridge of the nose, and then again over here on this bottom form. The top of the eyelids will sometimes have a little bit of light here, especially on the far closer side to us. The tear duct sometimes, because there's kind of water there, will sometimes catch a little bit of light. Sometimes the bottom eyelid, depending on the skin that's there, will have a little bit more of a kind of a sheen to it. Also, if there's any kind of teardrops, or not teardrops, but if there's some kind of liquid, even in the eye, sometimes you'll see a little highlight on the bottom here. So if we follow this kind of area here that's getting hit by light, you'll see it here. We see it on the highlight. We see it on this little, because there's water in the eye, right? There's like tears or that liquid, and then we can have a little bit here as well. Another area is the brow in the middle. We can kind of accentuate a little bit by having it be a little bit brighter. Most of these I'm adding kind of really subtly just because you know, it just takes a little bit just to kind of bring attention to these areas. And then on the forehead as well, which is on this one, it's kind of much higher up. As we go farther down the face, we can see there's some light areas towards the middle of the upper lip, especially here. Sometimes it will look like it kind of follows the outside of the lip. You can kind of see it on the left one a little bit easier. This is going to make the lips look a little bit more like that corner is going to be a little sharper. So you can sometimes add it in and find it there. Another place is the lips, because we made them darker now. Now we can actually put the highlights in here. And so for the highlights, it's very easy to start getting very distracted and to add a whole bunch of like little marks here. But my suggestion here is just try to find the biggest shape and connect them. So just go for like, and usually these are asymmetrical, so it doesn't help that we make them here in symmetry. So we're going to turn them off. And essentially, this is a kind of a sphere, right? So it might have a highlight here in the middle, but because of the form of the lip, it ends up being more kind of rectangular. So we're just going to make this kind of like blocky square shape here. And similar thing on the other side. And connect it first. And then after that, we can maybe add one or two kind of disconnected pieces, and maybe even start erasing into it slightly. And this might even be kind of too pronounced. You might want to tone it down, put on a new layer, lower the opacity. Occasionally you'll find a little bit of highlight that's able to kind of work its way here in this area, but zooming out on these references, you kind of don't really see it that much, so we're going to leave it out. Oh yeah, we forgot to add the brows in here, so we're going to drop them in here, and then move them slightly up higher, and we're going to put the opacity back to where it was. And I would say the most important thing is to kind of just get the shape right. We're going to keep this on a new layer here and turn on mirror again. That once you get the shape right, then you can kind of working on like the transition of hair in the middle, as it tends to kind of, you know, accumulate as it forms the brow here in the middle. And just kind of focusing on just maybe some slight modifications and adjustments to the shape, but not getting into the space where you're starting to add like a bunch of small little pieces. Try to keep it all as one shape for as much as you can, and then once the shape is looking a little bit better, you can even add a little bit of gray on the inside, because some parts of it are going to be a little lighter and some parts are going to get darker. For example, here on this one, looks like the middle section tends to be darker, so we can even go in here and add a little bit of gray, or sorry, dark gray. And I'll duplicate this set as well, because I'll be using my smudge tool just ever so slightly on some of the ends here, just to kind of merge them a little bit into the skin, because some of the hairs you don't really see that much. And we can even apply a little bit more shadow here on underneath this brow, which I'll do on a separate layer because that's part of the skin. So here I'm just using my eraser to erase parts of it so that it looks like it transitions more. Instead of using the blending tool, the eraser can also be used. Alright, I think, let's see, if we zoom out, yeah, it's looking a little better. So back to like the features, if any of the features kind of feel a little bit too large, for example, maybe possibly the eyes here. Also when we added the highlights, it really started to push the rounding out here of these, so I'm going to tone those back down. But yeah, now we can adjust features, right? If we kind of design them a little bit too large or too small, we can kind of lasso these features out, Control-Shift-C, Control-Paste, and now we can kind of shrink and adjust the features as needed. You know, as long as it's reading from far away, we can add a little bit of facial hair now, like we had the brows in here. So on a new layer, you can kind of go and create like the shadow shape here. And looks like there might be some on the chin. But it's better to not do these at the beginning, because it's going to kind of take away or kind of distract you from your other values. Also going to make it harder to render the forms because you're going to be worrying about these extra tiny little adjustments to the values here. So this is best done after. There, and we didn't even paint individual hairs here, which is kind of implied. It's kind of a final step here. I'm going to add a little bit more dark values to the under part of the nose. I think that's really going to help establish the lighting here. I'll do the same thing for the inside of the mouth here and the lower lip. So along the lower lip, just add more darker values. And we can even do it here on this lip part right here. Yeah, so like I said before, dark values are the ones that really help to kind of carry your forms. One more thing I'll include in here is the hairline. It's going to be different for different people, but just in general, it's usually going to be, at least from the front, it's going to be a line that kind of starts around the ear area here for like the sideburns. And then once it's going up here in this way, it'll usually kind of work its way into this section here. So you can imagine like a kind of a square in here. It almost kind of follows a similar line as the side plane of the face that we started off with. So you can kind of also help imagine it that way, like a lightning bolt shape almost. And then up here it could do a couple of different things. It can kind of come down this way, it can kind of go up that way. Yeah, a couple of different things. It can kind of do both, kind of go out and come back in. But this is probably the part that's most consistent. And yeah, we'll just kind of leave it here as kind of like more or less squarish kind of line here. So yeah, and then we'll fade it out just slightly, just so that you can see kind of like the hairline shape here. Alright, hope you enjoyed the video.